5 minutes to ignition. Dr. Chandra, I'm ready to stop the countdown if you want.
No, Hal, don't stop.
I am fully confident in your ability to study the phenomenon by yourself.
The very clever computer HAL 9000 from 2001 and its sequel 2010. And what kind of a movie has a computer for a lead character? A science fiction film, of course. Science fiction films, one of the most popular kinds of pictures being made the last few years. I'm Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. One of the first movies ever made was called A Voyage to the Moon. Science fiction has been popular with movie audiences ever since. On this special edition of At the Movies, we're going to take a look at the current boom in science fiction and fantasy, a box office explosion that started with Star Wars in 1977 and doesn't show any signs of letting up. We're going to look at scenes from recent films like The Terminator, Night of the Comet, and Starman, and Gene starts with a look at how this resurgence began with a couple of characters named Han Solo and Luke Skywalker.
Sounds familiar. One of the great stories in movie history has to be the tale of what prompted George Lucas to propose making a $10 million Flash Gordon movie, in effect, back in 1977, and what prompted 20th Century Fox and its then president, Alan Ladd Jr., to back Lucas. Maybe they both realized that the young people of the day didn't really have any heroes their own age being created for them in the movies. Jack Nicholson was a big star. John Wayne had just passed from the scene. Where were the teenage stars, the young people? Still, it was a very big risk for them to make this film because prior to Star Wars, no science fiction film had been really very big box office. But Star Wars changed all that. Part of its appeal was that in addition to these young heroes, the film itself was sort of one long video game for the eyes. Instead of dropping a quarter into a video game machine, you paid your $4 at the box office, sat down in your theater seat, and vicariously watched young Luke Skywalker shoot down enemy spaceships. Put in your money, here we go.
Control! Don't worry. You'll hold together. Jimmy, baby, hold together.
Sure beats pinball. Now, when a film is a surprise hit, that's when it really changes the direction of the movie industry. If Barbra Streisand has a hit picture, well, everyone expects she will. Same with Eastwood, so they don't really change the movies. The surprise hits change the movies, and when Star Wars was the biggest surprise hit in film history, suddenly every studio boss was saying, get me one of those. And the special effects men, who'd been out of work for a while, suddenly were very much in demand. The science fiction fantasy boom was now underway.
It was just amazing. I remember in 1977, the movie opened on a Wednesday, and somehow every kid in America knew on Tuesday night that he wanted to see that movie the next day. There were lines around the block, newspapers and television stations were down there covering it, and the phenomenon was that nobody expected this. The market surveys didn't show that Star Wars was going to be such a big hit, but it tapped into, I think, into two things. First of all, you're quite right, the hunger for heroes, and secondly, the hardware, the technology. This was an era when kids were playing the first early video games. They were into their Walkmans, their stereo systems, and so forth. Here was a whole movie that was just like they'd like to furnish their bedroom.
Very good.
Next at the movies, a character who makes Darth Vader look like a soft-hearted pushover. A character named The Terminator.
I'll be back.
A lot of science fiction borrows stories from other kinds of movies and uses them as an excuse for a lot of flashy special effects. And the Star Wars movies, for example, certainly did that. They were basically westerns. And so was The Terminator, an enormous hit for Arnold Schwarzenegger last year, which he played an inhuman stranger who marched into town on a mission of murder. The science fiction elements came in because he has arrived not from Dodge City, but from 40 years in the future. And in this scene, the Terminator is attempting to assassinate a woman who may become the mother of a leader of the future. Could almost be one of Big John Wayne's enemies clearing out the saloon if it weren't for the science fiction elements. A lot of violence there, a lot of violence all through the Terminator, in fact. But the movie also contains something that's sort of rare in science fiction movies, a warm and touching love story. And that takes place between the two characters that we saw earlier in that scene, Michael Biehn as Reese, the guy who saves Linda Hamilton as Sarah, a man sent from the future and a woman whose destiny is apparently already preordained. They are so sympathetic, and the Terminator, Schwarzenegger, is so mindless and hateful, and the paradox involved in the future changing the past is so intriguing that the Terminator was a surprisingly good movie. And one of the things that surprised me about was, if we're right that teenagers are the basic audience for science fiction, was that it had that love story, because I think teenagers are more interested in the technology and in the action than they are in the very nice little scenes in this movie between those two characters.
Yeah, I think part of the appeal for the film had to be the scenes on the future planet with the machines walking around and all that kind of stuff, the hardware of the film. I liked the film less than you did for the specific reason that all the technology and the stuff bores me. It frequently does in the movies. The love story got me this time, and that's what I thought was kind of special. The Terminator got a lot of attention because it was a box office hit, but I can think of an even better science fiction film that came out at the same time last year. The little scene, Night of the Comet, sort of a science fiction comedy about the day that most everyone in Southern California is incinerated, except for a couple of valley girls, when a comet passes by too close to Earth.
Cops? Where were you guys earlier? Oh, my license. Oh. I know you guys are probably going to give me a ticket or something, but I am really glad to see.
You know, there are a lot of people walking around with melted faces. The comet has incinerated almost everybody on Earth, especially a lot of adults. It's not so bad if you're a kid. I find so many science fiction films to be so solemn in their predictions, their dire predictions about the Earth's future, that it was a real pleasure to come across a more lighthearted film in the science fiction genre. I mean, sure, everybody's almost been wiped out by this comet, but for that girl, that means the lines are going to be a lot shorter at the mall where she likes to shop, and there's a marvelous scene where she and a girlfriend just shop to their heart's content. Night of the Comet didn't get much distribution in the last quarter of 1984. I think it's a buried treasure. I think it's good enough that it could still be re-released, and I think people would enjoy laughing along with all the people in this science fiction comedy.
I enjoyed the fact that they made the surviving characters into specific people, especially that bubble-headed little teenage girl who basically, you know, everybody is dead except for her sister and another guy and maybe a few army people, and the zombies are walking through the streets, and for her the basic problem is whether or not she's going to be stopped for a speeding ticket on a street where there isn't another car for 20 miles in either direction. Usually in movies like this, it's all solemnly symbolic. The man, the woman, the scientist. And here, it's a particular kid who survived. That's funny.
That's the one thing. I think I know you're more of a science fiction fan than I am, and it's the one thing that gripes me is that they just seem to be so heavy-handed, and basically, I know what's going on. The director is saying, you see, I know how the future's going to be, so I'm smarter than all you people out there, and I'll make a film, and I'm going to teach you something. And I go to science fiction films to not know that it's going to be bad out there in the future. I want to, you know, be maybe mystified.
Yeah, well, one of the criticisms of science fiction for a long time has been that the emphasis is always on the speculation and the thought and not on the characters. And of course, my favorite science fiction authors are the people who put people into their books in addition to ideas.
Well, they put people into this film, Night of the Comet.
Yeah. Next at the movies, 2001 raised a lot of questions which 2010 tries to answer.
I don't understand this. If this date is correct, then there's something down there. Can't be correct.
It is correct.
Back in 1968, when 2001, A Space Odyssey was first released, we were still in the spaced-out 60s, and it didn't matter if a movie was logical, just so it took you on a great trip. I can remember hippies hanging around outside the theater to get in after the intermission, lay on the floor in front of the screen and look at this great sound and light trip. Wow, man.
Refreshment sales were real big in intermission on that show.
I remember sitting up all night, too, arguing about the mysteries of 2001, which I still think is one of the greatest movies ever made. But there were a lot of questions without answers in that movie, and some of the best ones involved HAL 9000, the computer with a mind of its own. Here's a famous scene from 2001, starring Keir Dullea as an astronaut on a collision course with a computer.
Look, Dave. I can see you're really upset about this. I honestly think you ought to sit down calmly, take a stress pill, and think things over. I know I've made some very poor decisions recently, but I can give you my complete assurance that my work will be back to normal.
Yeah, but the question they never asked HAL 9000 was, what's normal? 2001 ended with that astronaut going on a mysterious sound and light trip into another dimension, and the question we all asked was, where did he go? Well, 16 years later, in a sequel named 2010, we got the answers, and we even got another look at Dave Bowman still drifting around out there in orbit around Jupiter, and still played by Keir Dullea.
Hello, Dr. Floyd. Please, believe me.
What are you?
This is very difficult for me. I don't have much time. I've been allowed to give you this warning. You must leave here in 2 days.
Allowed. By who?
I can't explain.
You see, something's going to happen. You must leave.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
You know, I've seen 2001 probably 20 times since it came out, and then to see the same sets and to see Keir Dullea again as Dave Bowman, the astronaut, in this film was really an uncanny experience. It was kind of interesting. If you want to compare the new wave of science fiction films with the classics like 2001, though, one thing immediately stands out. The new films are obsessed with technology and with showing how things work. In the 1960s, science fiction provided us with fantasy, with mystery, with tantalizing puzzles that weren't supposed to have answers. But in the more pragmatic 1980s, we get movies like 2010, which seem compelled to answer all the questions that we thought would never have answers. You want to know why HAL 9000 didn't follow instructions? Here's why. You want to know what those monoliths are doing? Here's what they're doing. What are they trying to tell us? They'll talk in English and send messages to our TV monitors.
Right, and I can't wait to see them take on Gone with the Wind and tell us what Clark Gable said as he walked out the door, you know, down the road a few minutes later. I agree with you. This last film disappointed me because I didn't need to see this film being made. I really like the films that reach out in a mysterious way, which Kubrick did. My gosh, when you think about that film, it does everything you would want in a science fiction film, from the Dawn of Man sequence, which is always ignored when you think about it, I mean, but it's so beautiful in and of itself, to the star ride at the end. I mean, there's just so much going on there. I don't know whether a project like that would get financed because people might say, you know, kids aren't going to understand this. Or where's the comic book? Where's the comic book? Where's the toy? We're going to have little monolith toys?
I think you put your finger right on it. Now, first of all, I did kind of like 2010. Don't put me in the same bag with you. I know you didn't like it. Yeah. I did. but I liked it in the Star Wars tradition and in the Star Trek tradition of comprehensible movies that you can understand.
Okay.
2001, you're absolutely right, could never be made today because they would say we're making movies for 17-year-olds. They have to have everything explained to them. That's condescending and insulting. The 17-year-olds in 1968 enjoyed 2001, but today, you're right, it's got to be marketed, it's got to be packaged, it's got to have a concept.
And this emphasis on technology really gets involved with, let's show, you know, the hand blowing up, or in Dune.
The transformation
in Dune,
scene.
I just can't believe that all the emphasis made on this one shot of this guy spinning around, or the scabs on his face, or the blood coming out. This isn't mysterious. This is technology. It's done with air pumps, and rather than with ideas, which is what Kubrick was dealing with.
Exactly so. Coming up next at the movies, an alien learns the ways of humans in Starman.
One of the great themes in science fiction movies over the years has been man's relationship to other beings in the universe. And one of the great messages of these films has been that we ought to welcome any visitors from outer space. We shouldn't fear them. We shouldn't fear strangers. And of course, the implied message is that we shouldn't fear strangers, people different from us, right here on Earth. And that message was never communicated more effectively than in the 1951 science fiction film called The Day the Earth Stood Still, where American government troops, wouldn't you know it, greeted a visiting alien not with open arms, but with open guns.
We have come to visit you in peace and with goodwill.
So you don't need a lot of fancy hardware. You can obviously see it's a guy in a suit there, and it looks like a leisure suit from 1970 or something. But it's sad. It's really sad what happens there. You don't need all the hardware to make a point. Of course, that film came out during the era when people were hunting for communists everywhere in the American woodwork, with neighbor suspecting neighbor. And so the buried message of The Day the Earth Stood Still was, hey, everybody, lighten up a little. And that same message, presented in a more positive way, was the central theme in Steven Spielberg's magnificent Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with scientist Francois Truffaut and the average American, played by Richard Dreyfuss, warmly greeting aliens from outer space. Close Encounters was very, very popular, and it will remain so for years. And lately, we've had a couple of fine variations on its brotherhood theme, including John Sayles, the brother from another planet, and Starman with Jeff Bridges as an alien who has transformed himself into a human shape. He has kidnapped Karen Allen, and together they travel cross-country, and at first, the alien, played by Jeff Bridges, is treated as if he were a criminal.
According to the AP Wire, one of the biggest meteorites to strike the planet Earth in the past 80 years hit last night near Ashland, not far from Chemagnon Bay. So you folks who called in to say you saw a flying saucer land over.
That's about you, isn't it? You really are some kind of Martian or something, aren't you? What do you want here? What are you doing? What do you want with me? Or where are you taking me? Why do you look so much like Scott?
I can't get no satisfaction.
Does it?
With you.
Help! Help me! Help me, please! I'm being kidnapped!
I send greetings. What the hell's going on here?
I'm being kidnapped!
I send the greetings. Again, we hear that line. Starman turns out to be a science fiction love story, and a very good one at that. And again, its message is not just love thy neighbor, but love the person or thing or ball of energy that lives millions of light years away. And I don't know any nicer message than that.
You know, I think that every period in the movies has gotten the kind of aliens that it deserved. During a period of Cold War, we got aliens that were interpreted as threats from outer space. During a kind of a lightening up period in the 70s, we got the beautiful and moving aliens from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But one of the funny things you can see in both Day the Earth Stood Still and in this movie, Starman, and also in Close Encounters, is that the aliens are always humanoid. In other words, we have the ego that's big enough to think that whatever they look like, they'll look something like us. And to me, the greatest aliens of all were those monoliths, or whatever they were, in the original 2001. An utter, impenetrable mystery. And that's what I like the best.
Okay, well, I think it's the best one that I've seen in all the years that I've been a film critic. It's #1.
I'm with you. That's all for this week. Next week at the movies, reviews of 4 new films that are going to be opening around the country. And until then, we'll see you at the movies.
Diet Shasta now with the great taste of NutraSweet with 18 fabulous flavors. Even the toughest critics say, I want a pop. Diet Shasta. Pan-American, whether it's business or pleasure or a little bit of both across the country or around the world. Pan Am, you can't beat the experience. Raisinets and Goobers are playing everywhere, starring plump, juicy raisins and great golden peanuts. Both now feature creamy Nestle milk chocolate. New Glade Fabric Fresh. Fresher fabrics mean a fresher home in spring clean or ultra fresh scents. Glade Fabric Fresh.
Don't miss Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert's review of Harrison Ford in Witness next week only at 6 p.m.